After I was robbed, I couldn't sleep in my own home anymore. Every creak of the old wooden floors became a threat. Every shadow on the wall stretched into something menacing. My heart beat like a drum in my chest, loud, uneven, filled with both fear and resentment. I thought maybe staying with my son for a few days would bring me comfort, or at the very least safety. But when I reached out with trembling hands to my own flesh and blood, his words cut me deeper than any burglar's knife. "I don't need an extra mouth to feed in my house," he said. Cold, sharp, final. I stood there in silence, expecting love, but receiving cruelty. A father turned away like a beggar. And yet the story didn't end there. Because one evening when I went to visit him, uninvited, desperate for some sign of compassion, I saw something that would tear our family apart forever. But before I tell you what I found, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and let me know in the comments where in the world you're listening from. Your support keeps stories like this alive. Now, let me take you back. The picture frame lay shattered on the hardwood floor, the glass splintered like a spiderweb, Ella's smiling face trapped beneath the cracks. Her eyes, once so full of light, looked up at me through broken shards. My keys slipped from my hand. They clattered loudly against the doorframe, the sound echoing through the silence. Silence that was too deep, too heavy, wrong. I stepped into what had once been my living room. The coffee table was overturned, sprawled on its side, like some wounded animal gasping for air. Magazines lay scattered across the floor like autumn leaves in the wind. The drawer from my desk had been emptied, its contents strewn across the rug, forming a trail of white paper that led into the kitchen. "What in the world?" The words escaped me in a whisper. My suitcase dropped with a heavy thud behind me, the sound muffled by broken glass crunching under my shoes. With every step deeper into the house, I uncovered fresh wounds. The entertainment center was stripped bare, shelves, gaping open like a mouth missing teeth. My television gone. The stereo Ella had saved for 3 long months to surprise me with on our anniversary, gone. That's when the smell hit me. Not the warm, comforting scent of home I'd expected after 2 weeks away visiting my sister in California. No, this was different. Stale, sour, wrong. It carried with it the faint, unshakable trace of strangers. Strangers who had touched everything Ella and I had built together. Strangers who had invaded the heart of my life. I bent down, my trembling hands picking up a torn photograph from the debris. Melvin's high school graduation. He was grinning in that cocky way, his cap tilted just a little to the side. My arm was around his shoulders, but the picture was ripped, our connection torn apart, just like the family itself. I'd lived in that house for 23 years. 23 years where I barely remembered to lock the back door at night. Ella used to scold me, saying, "Silas, you trust people too much." She'd been right. She was always right. The kitchen was next. Drawers yanked open, silverware scattered across the floor, cabinet doors hanging loose on their hinges. My coffee canister lay overturned, grounds staining the white counters like spilled dirt over a grave. This wasn't random chaos. No, it was methodical, deliberate. Someone had been searching. My legs felt unsteady as I climbed the staircase, gripping the banisters so tightly my knuckles turned white. With every step, dread grew heavier in my chest. The bedroom was a battlefield. The mattress was half hanging off the frame. Dresser drawers, ripped open clothes spilling onto the carpet like entrails. Ella's jewelry box, the music one that played "The Way You Look Tonight," was overturned and silent. Empty. Her wedding ring, gone. The pearl earrings her mother gave her, gone. Every little treasure that had carried her scent, her touch, her memory, gone. But it wasn't until I stepped into the study that something inside me truly broke. The safe behind my desk. Its steel door hung open like a wound carved into the wall, its insides stripped bare. My father's gold pocket watch, passed down through 3 generations, gone. The emergency cash Ella had begged me to keep just in case, gone. The savings bonds we had bought, sacrificing vacations, dinners, luxuries because we thought someday they'd help Melvin, gone. My voice cracked into the emptiness. Who would do this? Who even knows where I keep? And then the thought came cold as a winter tide rising up my spine. Someone who had been here before. Someone who knew about the safe. Someone who knew about the spare key. Someone who knew I'd be away for exactly 2 weeks. The realization hit harder than any thief's crowbar. I sank into my desk chair, the only piece of furniture left standing in the room. My hands shook as I reached for the phone, guided by instinct more than thought. The numbers burned into my mind. 911. The line clicked. The dispatcher's calm voice cut through the storm inside me. 911, what's your emergency? My house. The words broke from me like glass under pressure. Someone broke in. I just got home from California, and everything's destroyed. The dispatcher's voice came steady, practiced calm in a way mine could never be. Are you in immediate danger, sir? Are the perpetrators still on the premises? I swallowed hard, glancing around the ruins of my living room, the tip table, the broken frame, the silence heavy as lead. No, they're gone. But they took everything, and they knew exactly where to look. We're dispatching officers to your location now. Can you give me your address? I recited the numbers automatically, though my mind drifted far from the present moment. The late afternoon sun slanted through the blinds, catching on shards of glass and overturned furniture, painting my loss in golden light that mocked me. It was as if the sun itself had chosen to illuminate my shame, the destruction of everything sacred, everything Ella and I had built. In the distance, sirens wailed their song, growing louder, closer, until it filled the air, colliding with the echo of my own words. They knew exactly where to look. 2 patrol cars slid into the driveway, red and blue lights casting fractured patterns across the walls of my broken home. I still clutched the phone in my hand, though the dispatcher's voice had faded, replaced by the sharp bite of reality. The first officer to step out was Johnson, a stocky man with graying temples. His gait was steady, measured the walk of someone who had seen too many living rooms turned crime scenes, too many families gutted by trust betrayed. Behind him was his partner, Martinez, young and sharp-eyed, carrying a camera and evidence kit like a soldier carrying weapons into battle. Mr. Mills Johnson's voice was firm but not unkind. I'm Officer Johnson. This is Officer Martinez. Are you injured? I shook my head. No, just overwhelmed. My voice sounded thin, like it belonged to someone else. Johnson's gaze swept across the room, catching details. I had missed the angle of the overturned chair, the footprints faint in the carpet, the unnatural silence. Martinez Johnson instructed, start with photos of the entry points and main areas. The young officer nodded, raising his camera. The first click cut through the silence. Another followed. Each flash painted the wreckage in stark white light, transforming familiar rooms into crime scenes. Sir Johnson turned to me gently. I need you to step outside while we do a quick sweep, just to be sure. From the porch, I watched them move through my home with the precision of men trained for violation. Johnson checked closets, corners, doors. Martinez's camera punctuated each discovery with a flash, each burst of light briefly resurrecting what the house used to be our bedroom. Ella's study, the hallway lined with pictures. Now all of it had become foreign, hostile, broken. All clear, Johnson finally called, his voice echoing through the hollowed space. Mr. Mills, you can come back in. Let's start at the point of entry. He guided me toward the back door. The lock, once reliable, now hung, splintered the wood around it, frayed like torn flesh. Johnson ran his fingers over the grooves. Forced entry. But see here. They worked the wood carefully, quietly. Took their time, used the right tools. This wasn't some kid looking for beer money. Martinez crouched beside the frame, dusting with practiced hands. The fine powder clung to the surface as he leaned in. The damage pattern matches experience, he said softly, more to himself than to me. Either professional or someone who's done this before. We moved through the house together, room by room. Johnson asked his questions, Martinez collected evidence, and I was forced to relive each violation. Every drawer opened, every memory stripped bare, every piece of Ella gone. How long were you away, Mr. Mills Johnson asked, pen poised. And who knew about your trip? 2 weeks, I replied, my voice catching on the number. I visited my sister in California. I hesitated, the silence pressing. I told my son, my neighbor Roy, maybe mentioned it to a couple of people at the grocery store. I stopped, a chill crawling up my spine. My eyes swept the ransacked room, but the things they took, the most valuable things, they went straight to them. As if, my words faltered, as if they already knew where everything was. The house seemed to close in around me, then not just broken, but betrayed, whispering secrets I wasn't ready to face. How could they have known about my father's watch? About the safe combination, something I'd guarded like a piece of my own soul? The question wouldn't leave me. It gnawed at the edges of my thoughts as Officer Johnson scribbled notes into his small weathered pad. His eyes lifted steady but probing. These thieves knew exactly where to look, he said, his voice calm, yet heavy with implication. That kind of precision suggests familiarity with your home. Do you have any ongoing disputes? Anyone who might hold a grudge? I shook my head, words catching in my throat. I'm a retired officer. I keep to myself. I help my neighbors when I can. I can't imagine who would do this. Across the room, Officer Martinez crouched by the gaping mouth of my emptied safe, his gloved hands still busy with the camera. The rapid flashes lit up the devastation like lightning. He glanced up briefly. No signs of random destruction, he observed. They weren't just here to smash and grab. They wanted specific things: jewelry, cash, electronics. But they left the family photos scattered on the floor untouched. Not torn, not defaced, almost like— He hesitated, scanning my face before finishing. Almost like they were angry, but still restrained. His words settled in me like ice. Angry, but restrained. Someone who cared enough not to destroy memories, yet cold enough to rob me of everything else. The kitchen table became our makeshift command post, the only surface left untouched by the chaos. Johnson spread out forms across it, his handwriting neat and deliberate, while Martinez entered details into his tablet with quiet efficiency. We'll need a full inventory of everything missing. Johnson explained, his pen poised. Start with the most valuable items. The list seemed endless as I spoke. My television. The stereo Ella had saved for months to surprise me with on our anniversary. My father's gold pocket watch. Ella's jewelry, every piece carrying her perfume, her laughter, her memory. The emergency cash she had insisted we keep for safety. Even my tools from the garage, the good ones I'd cared for like old friends. Each word was like tearing a strip of flesh from myself. Each missing item, another fragment of my life wrenched away, cataloged in cold ink. Johnson's tone softened as he paused, pen hovering. Mr. Mills, I need to ask about family members. Anyone facing financial trouble? Someone who might need money quickly? The question landed like a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. I stared at him, stunned. My son, Melvin. My voice cracked. He works as a mechanic. He's had rough patches, yes, but he'd never. The sentence broke in two. I couldn't force the words out. Martinez didn't look up from his screen. His voice was low, clinical, almost apologetic. Sometimes the people closest to us surprise us. I'm not saying it's family, but we can't rule out any possibilities. I wanted to argue, to defend Melvin, but the doubt had already crept in, threading itself into my chest like smoke I couldn't cough out. By the time their work was done, the neighborhood was cloaked in darkness. Johnson handed me a case number neatly written on official letterhead explaining the process. The next steps, the grim reality of slim chances at recovery. One more thing, he said, his eyes steady but kind. Consider staying somewhere else tonight. Sometimes perpetrators come back, especially if they think they missed something. Martinez added quietly, change your locks tomorrow. Install a security system if you can. I followed them to the door, watching their tail lights vanish into the night. The weight of their absence settled over me, heavier than the silence. The house no longer felt like home. It felt like evidence, cold, hollow, desecrated. Fingerprint powder coated my furniture in a fine gray film, like the ashes of something sacred burned away. Yellow evidence tape fluttered in the still air, marking places I was forbidden to touch. Johnson's words looped endlessly in my mind. Familiarity with your home. Someone who knew your habits. Someone who knew your schedule. The possibility I'd been resisting no longer felt like speculation. It felt inevitable. Alone now, I tried to restore some semblance of order. I righted a lamp only to find its shade torn. I gathered scattered books, but their spines were cracked, their pages bent. Every attempt at repair uncovered 10 more signs of violation. Broken picture frames cut into my fingers, sharp reminders of everything I couldn't mend. Furniture proved too heavy for my aching back, mocking my frailty. Exhaustion finally crushed me. My body screamed from the long flight, from hours hunched over forms, from the relentless tension that had seized my shoulders the instant I'd seen Ella's smiling face fractured behind broken glass. The house groaned in the silence, as if mourning with me. And I realized with a shuddering breath, I wasn't just robbed of possessions tonight. I'd been robbed of safety, of trust, of the fragile belief that the walls around me could protect what little I had left. The house no longer felt like mine. Every corner seemed tainted, poisoned by the touch of strangers who had rifled through my life with greedy, careless hands. It wasn't just about the missing objects. It was about the violation, the sense that my home had been turned inside out and now carried someone else's fingerprints in its very air. The silence inside pressed against me like a weight thick with suspicion and fear. For the first time since Ella's funeral 5 years ago, I realized I couldn't endure this alone. Independence had been my armor, solitude my companion, but now the cracks showed. I needed someone. I needed help. I found my phone half buried beneath a mound of scattered papers and old tax documents, its screen spiderwebbed with cracks, but still functional. My hand shook as I scrolled through the contacts list, a gallery of names that suddenly felt unfamiliar, almost foreign. When had I become so isolated that calling my own son felt like a test of courage? I pressed Melvin's name. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Finally, his voice cut through. Dad. His tone was clipped, taut, with something I couldn't place in unease, maybe even irritation. Why are you calling so late? I swallowed hard, my throat dry. Melvin's son. Something terrible happened. My house, it was robbed. While I was in California. For a moment there was only silence. In the background I could hear the faint drone of a television and Wendy's muffled voice asking him something. Robbed. He repeated the words slowly, as though buying himself time. Are you okay? I'm fine physically, I said quickly. But the house is destroyed. They took everything. Your grandmother's jewelry, your grandfather's watch, even the television. I can't stay here tonight. Could I possibly come over, just for a few days until I can get things sorted? The pause stretched unbearably long. My heart pounded in my chest, waiting. When he finally spoke, his words struck harder than any blow. Dad, look, I can't help you right now. I've got my own problems. It felt like the ground tilted beneath me. In 35 years, through scraped knees and broken bones, through heartbreaks and financial struggles, I had never once denied him comfort. But now when I needed him, just a couch, just a roof, he shut the door. But Melvin, I'm your father, I said, my voice cracking. I just need a couch for a few nights until I said no. His tone hardened, almost frantic. I don't need another mouth to feed right now. Find a hotel or something. Melvin, please, I begged. This is your childhood home. Someone violated everything your mother and I built together. I need family right now. His reply cut colder than the night air. Well, family isn't always there when you need them, is it? The bitterness in his voice stunned me into silence. He continued, each word sharper than the last. You'll figure something out. You always do. Then the line went dead. I stared at the phone in my trembling hand, unable to process what had just happened. His mother would have been ashamed. We had raised him to know better, to value loyalty, to stand by family when storms came. But the sound of his voice replayed in my mind, and with it came something more unsettling than cruelty fear. Guilt. The kind of tone a child uses when caught in a lie, lashing out to cover the truth. My own son had said no. Not just no, but with venom. The house around me seemed colder now, the shadows longer, the air heavier. Losing the television, the jewelry, even the tools in the garage, that was painful, yes. But this wound cut deeper. 35 years of birthday parties and baseball games, of late-night homework and early morning paychecks, of sacrifices Ella and I had made without complaint. And in return, when I reached out in desperation, I was met with rejection. I forced myself to move. I gathered what I could, some clothes, socks, underwear, into a battered overnight bag that had by some miracle escaped the chaos. My back ached with each bend and lift, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the hollow ache hollowing out my chest. At the front door I hesitated. The knob felt heavy, like a weight pressing back against me. When I finally pulled it open, the cool night air rushed in, carrying the scent of cut grass and something else, freedom perhaps, or just the sting of loneliness. Each step across my yard toward Roy's house felt like surrender. Defeat clung to me heavier than the bag on my shoulder. Yet the warm glow of his porch light shone ahead, a beacon of kindness where my own blood had failed me. Before I could even raise my hand to knock, the door swung open. Roy stood there, his weathered face lined with concern, framed by the golden glow of his porch light. In that moment, he looked less like a neighbor and more like a lighthouse keeper, guiding a storm-tossed sailor safely to shore. "Silas," he said, stepping aside. "Come in. Come in. I saw you walking over. The police already talked to me about what happened." The warmth of his home wrapped around me, instantly soft and steady like a blanket on a bitter night. Unlike my violated sanctuary, Roy's living room radiated safety. His worn furniture was arranged with military precision, the kind of order that spoke not of wealth, but of care. And for the first time since stepping into the ruins of my own house, I felt the faintest stirrings of comfort, fragile but real. Photographs from Roy's service years lined the shelves in strict formation medals, gleaming faintly beneath the lamplight, every frame dusted, every memory in its proper place. The order of his home stood in sharp contrast to the chaos I had just left behind. "What a terrible thing to happen," he said quietly, his weathered hands taking my overnight bag with a gentleness that betrayed the strength still in him. "In this neighborhood of all places. 23 years we've lived side by side. Silas and I never thought I'd see the day something like this would touch our street." Relief surged through me, sudden and overwhelming. Here finally was someone who understood, not with judgment, not with hesitation, not with the cruel edge of rejection I had heard in my own son's voice, but with simple, unconditional care. "Of course you'll stay here," Roy continued firmly, already pulling blankets from his hall closet, his movements brisk and precise. "Should have thought to offer sooner, but I figured family would—" He stopped, shook his head and muttered, "Well, never mind that now." I watched as he transformed his small living room into a sanctuary with military efficiency pillows, lined neatly, blankets tucked with the kind of discipline only years of service could instill. Within minutes, he had a bed prepared on his couch and was steering me gently toward the kitchen. "Coffee, tea, or something stronger?" Roy asked, pulling out two sturdy wooden chairs at his table. His voice carried the kind of calm authority that steadied me even when my chest felt hollowed out. "Coffee," I whispered, lowering myself into the chair. That would be perfect. The exhaustion I had been holding back all day crashed over me in that moment. My bones felt heavy, my muscles sore, and an ache deeper than anything physical gnawed at me from the inside. Roy busied himself with the coffee maker, each movement deliberate, almost ceremonial. The smell of brewing grounds filled the air, warm and familiar, wrapping around me like a protective cloak. "I told Officer Johnson everything I could remember," Roy said, settling across from me as the coffee percolated. His voice was steady, but there was something in his eyes, something sharp and observant, like a man still trained to notice what others missed. "About seeing Melvin's Honda at your place a few times this week." My head snapped up. "You saw Melvin Tuesday morning, I think, and again Thursday afternoon." Roy nodded, pouring the steaming liquid into our mugs. He slid one across the table toward me. "Good boy. Checking on his dad while you were away." I waved, but he seemed in a hurry. "Probably worried about you traveling alone at your age." The coffee warmed my hands, seeping heat into my trembling fingers. But Roy's words sent a very different kind of heat burning through my chest. Pride flickered, my son checking in, making sure I was safe, but it tangled with something else, something darker. Confusion. Doubt. "He's always been protective," I said slowly, almost to myself. "His mother taught him to look after family." "Ella," my throat tightened. "She was always teaching him that. Smart woman, your Ella. Rest her soul." Roy raised his mug in a quiet salute. "She'd be proud to see how he watches out for you." I forced a smile, but inside unease gnawed at me. If Melvin had been checking on the house, why hadn't he mentioned it on the phone? Why had his voice sounded so strange, so defensive, as though every word was carved out of stone? I'm glad he was keeping an eye on the place, I managed finally, though the words felt heavy on my tongue. Makes this whole thing even more puzzling. Roy leaned forward, lowering his voice until it carried the weight of a confidant's whisper. Between you and me, Silas, I think this was professionals. The way they knew exactly what to take, how quiet they were about it. This wasn't some desperate kids looking for quick cash. You think so? He nodded grimly, taking a long sip of coffee before answering. 26 years in the service teaches you to read situations. This was planned. Someone knew your routines, knew when you'd be gone. That's no accident. That's intelligence work, methodical, thorough, patient. His words landed heavy in the air like smoke curling through the room, thick and suffocating. I found myself tracing through a mental list of everyone who had known about my trip. The grocery clerk who wished me safe travels. The mailman I'd asked to hold my deliveries. My sister, though she was 2,000 miles away. And Melvin? This feels so calculated, I admitted at last, my voice barely above a whisper. Like whoever did this had been watching me, studying me. Roy's gaze sharpened, his jaw tightening. That's exactly what I told the police. He leaned back, his chair creaking under his weight. Reminds me of surveillance ops. You don't strike unless you're sure. And they were sure. Silence settled between us, but it wasn't empty. It was the silence of two old men worn down by years of battles his own, foreign soil mine within my own family, sitting together trying to make sense of a violation that felt almost too precise to be random. Outside, the neighborhood had grown quiet, the comforting glow of porch lights standing guard over darkened streets. From Roy's window, I could see the faint outline of my house, broken, violated, no longer home. I'll help you clean up tomorrow, Roy offered at last, his voice steady, grounding. And for the first time since I had stepped into the wreckage of my life that afternoon, I felt a flicker of something I thought I'd lost entirely: hope. No sense facing that mess alone. The simple words landed heavier than Roy probably realized. My throat tightened as I managed. I appreciate that more than you know. The words came out rough, ragged, like they'd been dragged across gravel. Roy only smiled, broad, uncomplicated, genuine. What else are neighbors for, he said, as though it were the most obvious truth in the world. His hands, calloused from years of service and steady living, tugged the blanket one last time, smoothing its corners with a soldier's precision. Then with a small shrug he added, besides, I want to get a closer look at how they got in. Might need to upgrade my own security after this. That night, stretched out on his couch, I found myself staring at the ceiling while Roy's words circled in my mind. Someone planned this carefully. He was right. Every detail of the break-in, every precision cut and chosen theft screamed of method, not desperation. That thought should have filled me with terror, but instead it crystallized something inside me. 30 years as an engineer had taught me a hard truth. Every problem, no matter how tangled, has a solution. Every mystery leaves traces if you know how to look. Someone had violated my home. They had stolen not just objects but fragments of my life. My memories, my late wife's touch on every shelf. And I swore as I drifted into sleep that I would uncover who did it. The last sound I registered before exhaustion claimed me wasn't the hum of the refrigerator or the creak of the old couch springs. It was Roy's voice echoing back to me. Good boy, checking on his dad. Morning arrived with a clarity I hadn't expected. The bitterness of fresh coffee, the solid weight of a good breakfast, and Roy's quiet presence restored some of my sharper edges. The fog of shock had lifted, leaving room for thought, for order. By habit, I began to list out tasks in my notebook, insurance locks, police reports, but one line towered over all others in my mind. Talk to Melvin. Properly this time. His townhouse was modest, one of those starter homes built decades ago for families just finding their footing. I'd helped with the down payment 3 years ago, a proud moment for me watching my son take those first true steps into independence. I had wanted so badly to believe he was building a future stronger than mine. But as I pulled into his narrow driveway, the details told another story. Peeling paint along the window frames, a crack zigzagging down the front step, grass grown patchy and tired, needing attention that had clearly not come. Life, it seemed, had been wearing at him harder than he'd let on. I pressed the doorbell. Inside, muffled movement. A voice, maybe two, then silence. Footsteps, hesitant, approached. The door opened and Melvin stood framed in the threshold, his face pale, eyes wide as though I'd caught him off guard. Dad, what are you doing here? His voice cracked with something that wasn't quite surprise but wasn't welcome either. His reaction landed like a blow. This wasn't the greeting of a worried son whose father had just lived through a break-in. This was something else: defensiveness, unease. "Hello, son." I kept my tone calm, measured. "Sorry to drop by unannounced, but we need to talk." He shifted, blocking part of the doorway, as though buying time. His eyes darted over his shoulder just for a second before he stepped aside. "Yeah, okay. Come in, I guess." The living room felt small, stifling. Dishes stacked on end tables, magazines spilling across the coffee table. The air carried a faint smell of stale food and too many restless nights. Melvin moved quickly, nervously, brushing clutter aside to make space on the couch. He wouldn't meet my eyes. "Where's Wendy?" I asked, lowering myself onto the couch, its cushions sinking deep beneath me. "At work," he said quickly. "Double shifts this week." His leg bounced relentlessly as he perched on the edge of an armchair. "Look, Dad, about last night, I was tired, stressed. Didn't mean to sound so harsh." I leaned back, steady my voice, deliberately gentle. "I understand pressure, son. We all face difficult times. But family." I let the word hang between us. "Family should stick together during a crisis, don't you think?" His laugh was sharp, brittle. "Right. Family, of course." Something in his tone made my stomach twist. I leaned forward. "Roy mentioned he saw your car at my place a few times this week." The change was instant. Melvin's jittering stopped. His face hardened. His body went rigid. "Did he?" He swallowed, eyes flicking away. I don't remember driving by there." "You were checking on the house while I was away, weren't you? Just like your mother taught you." "Maybe once or twice," he muttered, his voice tight. Why does it matter? The contradiction hit me like a punch. Don't remember. Maybe once or twice. My engineer's brain honed to spot even the smallest inconsistencies, cataloged every word, every pause, every glance away. "You seem nervous, Melvin," I said softly, though my chest had gone cold. More nervous than I expected, given everything that's happened. And for the first time, I wondered if my son knew more about this violation than he was willing to admit. He shot to his feet so suddenly, the chair rocked back. His pacing took him straight to the window, where he stood stiff as a post, shoulders locked, tight hands wringing each other like they were trying to strangle the truth from his own skin. "Of course I'm shaken," he burst out, his voice louder than necessary. "My father's house was robbed. Someone broke into your life, stole your things, violated your privacy. How am I supposed to feel?" The words themselves carried outrage, but the performance was off. I'd worked too many years in engineering not to recognize when the numbers didn't add up. His tone said one thing, but his body betrayed another story. The tightness in his jaw, the restless shifting, the refusal to meet my eyes, all of it reeked not of fear or anger, but of guilt, or something perilously close to it. "Sit down, son," I said gently, forcing my voice to remain steady. "You're making me nervous." Melvin dropped back into his chair, but it was like asking a storm to sit still. His fingers tapped a relentless beat on the armrest. His knee bounced, his eyes darted everywhere but me, skittering around the room like a trapped animal seeking an exit. "Tell me about these visits to check on the house," I pressed, choosing each word with care. "What exactly were you checking?" He gave a shrug that tried too hard to appear casual. "Just, you know, making sure everything looked normal, that nobody was hanging around. And did everything look normal?" The pause stretched too long, too strained. Finally, "Yeah, everything was fine." But nothing was fine. The silence between his words screamed louder than anything he said. Every answer sounded rehearsed, every gesture too controlled, like he was performing in a play he hadn't rehearsed enough. This wasn't my boy, not the child who once came home trembling after breaking a neighbor's window, tears pouring as he confessed before I even asked. Not the young man who'd once called me at midnight, voice cracking, to admit he'd dented the family car. That son had been incapable of deception. This man before me, he was a stranger wearing my son's face. "Melvin," I said softly, leaning forward. "What's wrong? And don't tell me it's just the burglary. Something else is eating at you." He shot up again like the chair was electrified. "I need some water," he muttered, heading to the kitchen. "You want anything?" As he disappeared, the sound of running water became the backdrop to my thoughts. I sat alone, piecing together the fragments of our exchange, the way I'd once pieced together broken schematics at work. Every question had hit a wall. Every attempt at closeness had been dodged. My son wasn't just hiding something, he was drowning in it. My eyes drifted over his living room, now stripped of his presence. The evidence told its own story clearer than his words. Bills stacked high on the side table, a few stamped in glaring red overdue. A gaming magazine flipped open to a feature on poker strategies. Behind the couch, empty beer bottles lined up like soldiers defeated in battle. This wasn't just clutter. This was the debris of a life collapsing in slow motion. When he returned, the glass in his hand trembled faintly. I took one more shot. "Son," I said carefully, "if you're in some kind of trouble, you can tell me. Whatever it is, we'll figure it out together." His laugh startled me. It was sharp, bitter, like metal scraping concrete. Trouble. What kind of trouble could I possibly be in, Dad? It wasn't an answer. It was a challenge. A test. But I didn't know the rules, and that scared me more than anything. "I don't know," I admitted quietly. "That's why I'm asking." Melvin sank back into his chair, but his whole body was still wound tight, coiled like a spring that might snap at any second. His eyes flicked toward the mantelpiece once, twice, then again, before jerking away each time, as though something there burned his gaze. Moments later, he excused himself again, muttering something about checking on dinner. The house grew too quiet in his absence, holding its breath the way the sky does in the pause between lightning and thunder. I leaned back, my gaze wandering over the clutter he'd left behind. Bills, bottles, magazines, all of it painting a picture of a young man fighting battles I hadn't known existed. My poor boy. How blind had I been? Then my eyes landed on the mantelpiece, a row of framed photographs and trinkets. Melvin as a boy, grinning gap-toothed at a baseball game. Melvin's wedding day, his arm wrapped proudly around Wendy in her simple white dress. A few odd knickknacks that looked like they'd come from flea markets. And a watch. Something about it snagged my attention, ordinary at first glance, yet out of place among the rest. My chest tightened as I stared, my mind racing back to the wreckage of my own living room, where that very same watch had once rested safely. At first glance, it seemed harmless, almost invisible among the clutter of Melvin's living room. Just another trinket, just another piece of decoration that a young couple might set out on their mantle to make the house feel like home. But there was something about it, the curve of the case, the weight of its presence, that snagged my attention and refused to let go. The brass face caught the late afternoon light streaming through Melvin's window, glowing like an ember. My eyes lingered, tracing the worn leather band, cracked and softened by years of handling. The shape of the winding crown, slightly bent, struck me like a bolt of lightning. It had been bent that way since 1987, when a foolish 10-year-old version of myself had dropped it while secretly trying to wind it. My heart stuttered, then stopped. I rose from the chair, but it felt as if my body no longer belonged to me. My legs were heavy, each step toward the mantelpiece, an act of will, as if I were forcing myself through water, thick as oil. A prayer pulsed in my head, desperate and futile. Please let me be wrong. Please, God, let this be some cruel coincidence. Please don't let it be what I think it is. But the truth came into focus with devastating clarity as I drew nearer. There, the tiny scratch etched into the crystal face, the one I had put there by carelessly bumping it against a doorframe as a boy. There, the subtle patina on the brass case, the kind that only decades of touch and love could give. And though I could not see it, I knew what was carved on the back: to William Mill's faithful service, 1943-1978. My father's watch, my grandfather's legacy. The timepiece that had been carried through wars, through hardship, through the long days and longer nights of honest work. It had been passed from father to son, generation to generation, each man entrusted to carry it forward with dignity until one day it would rest in Melvin's hands. Not like this. Not stolen. Not desecrated. The room tilted around me. My blood roared in my ears like the crashing of waves. I gripped the mantelpiece to keep myself upright, my knuckles whitening against the wood. 35 years of fatherhood, of scraped knees, bedtime stories, college tuition, and whispered prayers collapsed into one brutal truth that struck with the weight of a hammer my own son had robbed me. The boy I had taught to ride a bicycle, to throw a curveball, to respect people with kindness and honesty. The young man whose first paycheck I'd framed, whose hand I'd shaken on the day he closed on this very house. The man I had defended, supported, and loved without condition, he had betrayed me. A whisper escaped me, torn from somewhere deep inside the scratch, from when I dropped it at age 10. There's no doubt. Footsteps approached from the kitchen. Melvin's voice carried light, unbothered. "Dad, everything okay out there?" I forced myself to move to release the mantelpiece before my son could see me trembling. I staggered back to the chair, lowering myself with what I hoped looked like casual ease. But my hands shook on the armrests, and each breath came sharp and shallow, as if the air itself resisted entering my lungs. When Melvin reappeared, I found my voice strange, distant, detached, almost as though it belonged to someone else. "That's a handsome watch on your mantel," I said. He glanced over. Too quickly. Too casually. "Oh, that old thing. Picked it up at a pawn shop downtown." The lie struck harder than the theft itself. Not just the crime, but the ease of it, the smooth roll of deception across his tongue. "Looks like an antique," I managed, testing him. "Yeah," he said with a shrug, pouring poison into the silence. "Good quality. Got it cheap." Guy probably didn't know what it was worth. Each word cut deeper, twisting the blade already lodged in my chest. My own son, my flesh and blood, looked me in the eye and lied about stealing his great-grandfather's watch. The watch that represented family honor, endurance. The watch that should have been a gift, a legacy, a bridge connecting him to the men who had come before. Instead, it was a stolen prize. I pushed myself to my feet, though my legs trembled beneath me. "Well," I said, my voice hollow, "I should probably head back. Roy's helping me clean up this afternoon." Relief flickered across Melvin's face, quick as a shadow, but I caught it. He was glad I was leaving. Glad the moment of danger had passed. "Sure, Dad," he said lightly. "And again, sorry about last night. I'll call you later, check in on how you're doing." I nodded, but inside me something had broken, something that could never be mended. Another lie, and we both knew it. He wouldn't call, he never intended to. The words had been nothing more than smoke, a hollow promise meant to cover the silence between us. The walk to my car felt less like a simple departure and more like a punishment. Each step dragged me deeper into something heavy and suffocating, as if the earth itself wanted to hold me back, to keep me from leaving that house with the truth I could no longer ignore. My legs felt clumsy, disconnected from my will. The familiar jingle of my keys betrayed me. I dropped them once, then again, my trembling fingers refusing to obey. When I finally managed to slide the key into the ignition, the engine roared to life far too loudly, a cruel reminder of how unsteady I had become. Through the windshield, I caught sight of Melvin standing at the window, not waving, not even pretending to care whether his father, recently robbed and heartbroken, got home safely. No, he was only watching to make sure I was gone. The sight pierced me deeper than any weapon could. My own son, my flesh and blood. The boy I had once carried on my shoulders, who used to beg me to tell him one more story before bed, now looked at me as if I were the intruder, the problem to be managed. The drive back blurred into something dreamlike. Traffic lights changed, cars shifted lanes, pedestrians crossed the streets, and I obeyed them all automatically, like a machine running on reflexes. My body drove, but my mind was a storm. Every mile was filled with dark arithmetic, the hours of my absence, the precise knowledge of my hiding places, the way only certain things had been taken while others left untouched. These were not the marks of random thieves. These were the calculations of someone who knew me too well, someone I had raised. By the time I turned into Roy's driveway, the haze had burned away into a single searing truth. If Melvin thought he could dismantle everything his mother and I had built with our own hands, our home, our trust, our legacy, without consequence, then he had gravely underestimated the old man who had given him life. My boy had made the gravest mistake of his life, and yet even as anger rose, so did heartbreak. The steering wheel felt alien beneath my hands as I sat outside his townhouse, staring at the world that had become unrecognizable in the span of an afternoon. I twisted the key, and the mechanical click was deafening, reverberating like a final judgment. My thoughts spiraled back again and again to the watch, the scratch from when I dropped it as a boy, the bent crown, the patina that had built over decades. Every detail screamed its identity at me. There was no mistaking it, no other explanation. I pulled into a gas station, my hands shaking so violently I could barely hold the wheel. The world outside my windshield carried on indifferently, customers carrying groceries, children tugging on their mothers' hands, engines, humming, lives unfolding. Ordinary people moving through ordinary days. And me, my world had just shattered into shards too sharp to hold. 35 years of fatherhood love, sacrifice, all of it condensed into one merciless truth my son had stolen from me. I sat there with the engine idling, chest rising and falling in ragged bursts, trying to breathe through disbelief. My mind grasped for excuses, for explanations that might save him. Maybe he'd bought it from someone. Maybe it had somehow landed in that pawn shop he mentioned. But no, the nervous eyes, the restless hands, the evasive answers, the calculated visits, it all pointed in one direction. 20 minutes passed before I trusted myself to keep driving. Omaha slid past in watery smears of color, the streets I'd known for decades warped by the fog of betrayal. What used to feel like home now felt hostile, each familiar corner, whispering that nothing would ever be the same. When I finally pulled into Roy's driveway, I saw him bent over his garden trimming back a hedge. He looked up smiling at first until his eyes met mine. The smile dissolved. He dropped the shears, brushing soil from his palms. "Silas," he said softly, "you look like you've seen a ghost." I swallowed, but the words caught like gravel in my throat. The talk with Melvin, it didn't go well. Something's not right. I can't explain it yet, but something's very wrong. Roy studied me the way only an old friend can, the way someone who's been through fire himself learns to read every line of another man's face. He didn't press, didn't demand answers. Instead, he simply nodded. "Family troubles are the hardest kind. You need to talk about it." "Not yet," I rasped. "I need to be sure first. Need to check some things." Roy's gaze lingered heavy with concern, but he only said, "Well, you know where to find me when you're ready." Coffee's always on. Inside his guest room, I lay on the narrow bed, staring up at the water stains on the ceiling. But the stains blurred and shifted, reshaping themselves into the face of a boy who had once clutched my hand at a baseball game, who had once looked at me with unshakable trust. And I lay there wondering when exactly the boy I loved had vanished and what kind of man had taken his place. The image of the watch haunted me like a ghost that refused to fade. Again and again my mind conjured it, the brass face catching the slant of afternoon light, the leather band softened by years of wear sitting there on Melvin's mantle, as if it were an accusation. Not just an object, a verdict, a sentence passed without trial. But doubt gnawed at me with sharp, relentless teeth. 35 years of raising him, of guiding him, of teaching him right from wrong. Was it all meaningless? Had I really failed so completely that the boy who once wept over crushing an ant beneath his shoe could now strip his own father's home bare? Could the child I had once carried on my shoulders, the boy who used to slip his hand into mine without hesitation, be the same man who had robbed me? The father in me screamed for denial, clung desperately to excuses. But the engineer in me demanded order, demanded evidence that would withstand scrutiny. Feelings weren't enough. Memories weren't enough. If I was going to confront him, if I was going to break whatever bond remained between us, I owed it to us both to be certain beyond all shadow of doubt. So I did what I had always done in impossible situations. I reached for a notepad. Method over madness. Pen over panic. I began to make lists. Times, dates, what had been stolen. Who might have seen something? My mind dissected every clue. The gambling magazine I had dismissed now suddenly screaming its warning. The bills stacked on his counter, stamped overdue in scarlet letters. His jittery, hostile refusal when I asked for help. The pattern emerged, brutal in its clarity. I had been too trusting, too blind, too eager to believe in the best of him. But patterns weren't enough. No, if I was to condemn my son in my own heart, I needed proof that would stand in a courtroom, proof that could never be swept aside with a lie or an apology. Because if my suspicions were true, that was exactly where this was heading. 3 hours later, I had a strategy. It would take patience, precision, the same careful, methodical thinking that had carried me through 3 decades of solving engineering problems. Only this time, the problem was my own blood. If I was wrong, I would fall to my knees and beg his forgiveness, spend the rest of my days repairing what I had broken with my mistrust. But if I was right, if my son had truly stolen from me, then he would learn his old man was capable of far more than he'd ever imagined. The yellowed pages of the Omaha directory crackled beneath my fingers as I traced listings of pawn shops. Roy lent me his car again wordlessly, his trust so steady it felt like a knife twist compared to Melvin's betrayal. And so began 7 days of systematic investigation. Pete's Pawn Palace on Dodge Street was my first stop. The owner, a thick-set man with wary eyes, studied the photographs I'd prepared. His finger blunt and sure tapped the watch. "Yeah, I remember that piece. Vintage, real-quality workmanship." He squinted. "Young guy, mid-30s maybe. Nervous as a cat." My chest tightened. "Can you describe him more specifically?" "Dark hair. About 6 feet. Work clothes. Said it was his grandfather's watch. Needed cash, quick some emergency." Pete's eyes narrowed at me. "Why you asking insurance or something?" "Something like that," I muttered, keeping my voice level, though my heart roared in my ears. The receipt confirmed the unthinkable May 13th, 2 days into my trip to California. The scrawled, half-legible signature was nothing more than a formality. The physical description matched Melvin exactly. $300. For a watch worth 10 times that. 2 more shops told the same story. My television at Second Chance Electronics. My wife's necklace at Ella's Jewelry, sold at Golden Memories Consignment. Each transaction hurried desperate, made by a young man who fit Melvin's description so precisely it was like watching the crime replay on loop. The final blow came not from strangers, but from someone I trusted. Mrs. Peterson, my neighbor, 3 doors down, welcomed me into her kitchen with a smile. "Oh, I definitely saw that Honda Civic on the 13th, she said, brightly pouring tea into a chipped porcelain cup. "Around 2 in the afternoon. Strange since you weren't home, but I figured maybe Melvin was checking on things." My throat tightened. "Did you see him clearly?" She frowned, not his face, but the build looked familiar. "Young man, moving quick, parked bold as brass, right in your driveway." The timeline locked into place like gears meshing in a machine. While I was laughing with my sister over lunch in San Francisco, my son had been prying open my back door, pawning my life piece by piece 3 time zones away. The Henderson security camera sealed it. A Honda Civic. His license plate number. Time stamped 2:17 p.m. May 13th. Each piece of evidence was another nail hammered into the coffin of hope, bearing any chance that I was wrong. And yet, staring at that damning footage, the tears stung before I even realized I was crying. Because it wasn't just theft. It wasn't just betrayal. It was my boy. My son. The same boy I had once sworn to protect against the whole world. And now the world needed protection from him. The engineer in me cataloged every detail with cold precision, but the father in me, what little of him remained, was dying with every new confirmation. Each receipt, each witness statement, each timestamp video was another cut across the fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, I was wrong. By Friday evening, all hope had bled out. I followed Melvin from the auto shop to Riverbend Casino, my hands clenched on the steering wheel, my breath shallow as if bracing for impact. He didn't linger in his car, didn't hesitate. He strode across the cracked asphalt of the parking lot with the purposeful stride of a man chasing ruin, of someone feeding a hunger he could never satisfy. I sat there for 2 long hours, the neon glow from the casino sign washing across my windshield. I watched others come and go, laughing, shouting some triumphant, most hollow-eyed, but it was him I was waiting for. When Melvin finally emerged, the sight of him hit me harder than any evidence folder ever could. His shoulders slumped, his eyes vacant, his steps slow and defeated. He looked smaller somehow, as if the weight of his choices had begun to crush him from the inside out. I didn't need to count the money he'd lost. I could see it in the way he dragged himself back to his car. The last piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Desperation had driven him to rob his own father, and here he was throwing away what little he had left. Back in Roy's kitchen, under the muted hum of the refrigerator, I spread everything out across the table. Photographs, pawn shop, receipts, witness statements, timelines. Each page was another nail in the coffin of the boy I had once raised. The paper smelled of ink and dust, but to me it reeked of betrayal. I sat there for hours staring at the mosaic of Melvin's downfall, until finally, in a voice that barely belonged to me anymore, I whispered to the empty room, "The boy I raised is gone. This stranger who stole from me has taken his place. But resignation wasn't enough. He needed to know that I knew. He needed to see the proof, to feel the weight of his actions staring back at him. Justice demanded truth, and truth demanded courage. Tomorrow I would confront him face to face. The next morning, the manila folder sat on the passenger seat like a loaded weapon as I drove toward Melvin's townhouse. It wasn't paper anymore. It was dynamite ready to blow apart whatever remained of our relationship. A week of methodical investigation had armed me with evidence so irrefutable it would satisfy any courtroom. But this wasn't for a judge. This was for a father and a son. Melvin answered the door with the same confused, slightly guarded expression he'd worn the last time I'd come by. Only this time I felt nothing but cold, hard determination. "Dad, what brings you here again?" "We need to talk, son. May I come in?" The living room was just as I remembered, cluttered, worn, weighed down by silent evidence of financial strain. And there on the mantelpiece, the brass pocket watch glinted in the afternoon light like an accusation cast in gold. I set the folder on the coffee table with deliberate care, the sound of it hitting wood louder than it should have been. "Melvin?" I said, my voice steady, though my heart felt like breaking glass. "I know you robbed my house, and I have proof." His face drained of color. "What, Dad? You're scaring me. What are you talking about? Stop lying." I opened the folder and slid the first photograph across the table. "I have witnesses, I have receipts, I have documented evidence, and I have this." I pointed to the watch gleaming above us, my father's watch, the heirloom that had survived generations until Melvin pawned it off like cheap trinket. "I bought that back from Pete's Pawn Palace. May 13th, $300. I pushed the receipt toward him. "Physical description matches you perfectly. Do you want to explain how your grandfather's watch ended up in a pawn shop 2 days after my house was robbed?" His hand trembled as he picked up the slip of paper. His mouth opened, closed, opened again, silent like a fish gasping for air. "Here's Mrs. Peterson's statement. She saw your car in my driveway that same afternoon." I added another sheet. "And here's security camera footage from the Hendersons. License plates, yours, timestamp 2:17 p.m., May 13th. Dad, please receipt from Second Chance Electronics. That's my television. And Golden Memories consignment, your mother's jewelry, all sold under your name." Each piece of evidence hit the table like a judge's gavel, final and merciless. Melvin broke. He collapsed into his armchair, burying his face in his hands. His sobs weren't the cries of a grown man. They were raw, broken sounds, closer to an animal in pain than to the son I remembered. "You don't understand," he choked between shuddering breaths. "They were going to hurt Wendy. I owed $15,000 to people who don't accept payment plans. And in that moment, staring at the ruined shell of my son, I felt something worse than anger. I felt grief for the boy he once was and for the man he'd become. "So you stole from your own father, instead of asking me for help." The words left my mouth not as a simple accusation, but like a blade slicing through flesh, sharp, raw, and almost impossible to believe. Melvin's head snapped up. His eyes were bloodshot, swollen with tears, but still burning with that desperate need to justify himself. "You would have lectured me, Dad. You always do. Another one of your endless speeches about responsibility and stupid choices. You would have shamed me instead of helping." I drew in a long breath, every nerve in my body straining like a wire pulled too tight. "You're right, I would have lectured you. I would have told you hard truths. But alongside that, I would have helped you because you're my son. And you need to understand something. If you had come to me honestly, I would never have turned my back on you." Melvin let out a dry, broken laugh, twisted like a cracking glass. "I was going to fix it, I swear. Just one good win, Dad. That's all I needed. I'd buy everything back, put it all right, and you'd never know." The delusion laid bare. That gambler's fantasy, always one spin, one card, one roll, away from salvation. Always blind to the truth, the game was designed to take everything. Instead of trusting me, I said, voice steady but heavy, "You broke into your own home. You stole your mother's wedding ring, the very soul of her memory. You pawned your great-grandfather's watch, a piece of history that had survived 3 generations, for scraps. All for nothing more than the bottomless pit of your addiction." I kept my voice level, engineer steady, though my heart was shattering with each word. And worst of all, Melvin, you looked me straight in the eye and lied. His body jerked, upright eyes, blazing voice, raw with hysteria. You can't call the police on your own son. I tightened my grip on the phone, my hand trembling, but my will as cold and unyielding as tempered steel. Watch me, I said, thumb already pressing the call button. You made your choice the moment you turned yourself into a thief in your parents' home. His voice cracked, breaking into shards. Mom would never forgive you for this. The words struck me like a hammer to the chest, knocking the air from my lungs. But I stood my ground, my gaze unwavering. No, Melvin. Your mother would weep. But more than anything, she would be ashamed of what you become. He lunged at me, then reaching for the phone. But 35 years of hope, disappointment, and broken promises had hardened into something sharper than his desperation. I stepped back, thumb already pressing the final button. 911. What's your emergency? The calm, practiced voice cut through the room's suffocating tension like a blade through fog. I need to report a residential burglary, I said, my tone steady despite the tremor in my chest. The perpetrator is here, and I have evidence. Sir, is the suspect still on scene? Are you in immediate danger? I glanced at my son, eyes wild, body trembling, his desperation spilling over in every movement. He lunged again, clumsy, now his panic stripping him of coordination. I sidestepped, voice low but firm. The suspect is my son. He's not armed, but he is trying to stop me from reporting his crime. 15 minutes dragged on like an eternity. Melvin alternated between frantic pacing and collapsing into sobs, his pleas spilling out like a broken dam. Dad, please. Think about Wendy. Think about your granddaughter we're planning for. If you do this, you'll tear our family apart. You'll destroy us. I said nothing. The time for family considerations had ended the moment he forced open my door and stripped our legacy for cash. The brass pocket watch on the mantel caught the late afternoon light, gleaming like a silent witness to betrayal, shining with quiet judgment that cut deeper than any blade. Then came the sound. Sirens, shrieking through the fading day, ripping the silence wide open. 2 patrol cars pulled into the drive doors, swinging open with brisk efficiency. Officers Johnson and Martinez stepped out, faces instantly familiar. Mr. Mills Johnson said, his eyes narrowing with recognition. We responded to your burglary call 3 weeks ago. Are you saying you've discovered who did it? I inhaled slowly, the weight of 3 generations pressing down on me. My gaze didn't waver. Yes, Officer Johnson, I said. I've found the one responsible, and he's standing right here. Martinez's gaze shifted between me and Melvin, his eyes sharp but calm, the weight of professional judgment etched across his face. This is the son you mentioned during the original investigation, he asked, his voice careful, precise. Yes, I said, each syllable scraping against my throat like gravel. I have comprehensive evidence of his guilt. Melvin's voice cracked, his composure unraveling as he turned to the officers with a desperation that bordered on hysteria. This is a family matter, a private dispute. You can't just drag me away on my father's word alone. Johnson didn't flinch. His expression stayed carefully neutral, but the authority in his tone was unmistakable. Sir, we'll need to examine any evidence firsthand and make our own determination. The manila folder in my hand felt impossibly heavy, as if it contained not just papers, but the very weight of 3 generations of legacy. My fingers trembled slightly as I spread its contents across Melvin's coffee table. Photographs, receipts, witness statements. Every page told its piece of the story, methodical and merciless. These, I began, my voice steady but thick with restrained fury, are pawn shop receipts dated May 13th. They show the sale of my father's watch, a timepiece that survived wars, marriages, births, deaths, sold for a fraction of its worth. Sold by a man whose physical description matches my son exactly. I pointed one by one, stabbing at the evidence as though each page were a dagger. Here the pawn shop clerk's testimony, here the receipts with his signature, here the surveillance stills from the parking lot, his car plain as day. Martinez lifted his department camera, documenting each piece with the same mechanical precision I once used when designing blueprints. Click, flash. Another piece of my son's betrayal frozen in permanent record. These appear legitimate. Martinez confirmed, exchanging a grim nod with his partner. We'll be able to verify with the establishments. My chest tightened, but I pressed on. And here I added sliding another sheet forward security footage from my neighbor's cameras. His vehicle parked in front of my home the very hour the burglary occurred. And if that's not enough witness statements placing him directly at the scene, Melvin's face had drained of all color, his lips moving soundlessly, as though words might still save him. But his silence screamed louder than any denial. I turned, then lifting my hand toward the mantelpiece. My voice was quieter now, but sharper, like steel drawn from a sheath. In here, officers. My great-grandfather's pocket watch, sitting in plain sight in his home. Johnson leaned closer, careful not to touch. His eyes scanned the aged brass, the familiar distinctive scratch across its surface. This matches the description from your original police report, he said evenly. Exactly, I replied. That mark was made when I dropped it as a boy. I remember the sound it made against the stone floor. I never forgot it. And here it is proof that my son stripped it from my mantle, sold it, then somehow clawed it back when his luck ran out. Before anyone could speak, the sharp slam of a car door outside shattered the air. The front door burst open and Wendy stumbled in her work uniform, still clinging to her, like a second skin, eyes wide and wild. What's happening? She gasped, her gaze darting to the patrol cars, then to her husband. Melvin, why are the police here? Her voice cracked raw with panic. Melvin lowered his head, unable to meet her eyes. His silence was damning. Wendy, he stammered at last, there's been a misunderstanding. No misunderstanding, I said softly, the words falling like stones into a well. Your husband robbed my house, and I have proof. The scream that tore from Wendy's throat was not anger. It was anguish, primal and shattering. She dropped to her knees beside him, clutching his hands as if her grip could anchor him to the life that was slipping away. Tell them it's not true. Tell them you didn't do this. But Melvin's silence was louder than her pleas. His shame filled the room like a suffocating smoke. Officer Martinez finished his documentation, then leaned toward Johnson. Their hushed conversation lasted less than 5 minutes, but it felt like a lifetime. Finally, Johnson straightened, his face grave. Melvin Mills, he said firmly, you are under arrest for residential burglary and theft of property valued over $1,000. The words felt unreal, echoing in my son's living room as though they belonged to another family, another world. But the sound of metal cuffs clicking shut on Melvin's wrists was brutally, inescapably real. Dad, please. Melvin choked, his voice breaking, as the officers guided him toward the door. I'm still your son. I swallowed the lump in my throat, my eyes burning. That's exactly why this is necessary, I said, the words tasting like blood. Wendy's sobs followed us out the door, echoing through the empty house, tearing through the night as the patrol cars pulled away. When silence finally settled, I stood alone in the living room, staring at the vacant space on the mantel where my father's watch had been. The evidence, like my son, was gone, confiscated, processed, swallowed by the machine of justice. But the hollowness in my chest whispered a darker truth. Victory in this case might be the cruelest kind of defeat. 3 weeks slipped by and sleep never came. Night after night, I sat at Roy's kitchen table, the same stack of papers before me, the same cold coffee untouched at my elbow. You keep this up, you'll waste away to nothing, Roy muttered as he moved about the kitchen, starting a fresh pot without asking. His presence was grounding, steady, but it did little to quiet the storm inside me. The preliminary hearing notice lay in my hands, heavier than steel, colder than stone. Every line of text was another reminder the law would move forward now, unstoppable, grinding my son beneath its wheels. And no matter how righteous it was, no matter how necessary, it still felt like I had sacrificed my own blood at the altar of justice. July 15th. A date carved into my mind like a gravestone. The day when my testimony, my words would carry the weight of beginning the process that could condemn my own son to prison. I sat in Roy's kitchen that morning, a place that had become both refuge and confessional. My hands wrapped around a mug of coffee gone cold hours ago. Sometimes I wonder if Ella would understand. I admitted the first time I had dared to give voice to the doubt that had been gnawing at me in the dark, silent hours of night. Roy leaned back, his lined face steady, with the kind of quiet wisdom earned only through surviving too much. Your wife was a wise woman, Silas. She'd see the principle behind the pain. She'd know why you did what you had to do. But principles felt thin, abstract, useless at 3 in the morning when the weight of what I'd done crushed my chest like a stone. The house had grown unbearably quiet since Melvin's arrest, as if the very walls had gone still mourning with me. No television, no footsteps, no bursts of laughter from the kitchen. Just silence and the echo of choices that couldn't be undone. The district attorney's office sat on the 8th floor of a downtown building that smelled faintly of old carpet, burnt coffee, and bureaucracy. The fluorescent lights overhead hummed in a way that grated against my nerves. Rebecca Chen, the prosecutor assigned to the case, greeted me with a professional sympathy that both comforted and unsettled me. "Mr. Mills," she said, gesturing for me to sit in 30 years of practice, "I've never seen a father prosecute his own son with this level of documentation." Her words sliced deeper than she could have known. "Does that make it wrong?" I asked, my voice low. "No, sir," she replied gently. "It makes it extraordinary. The evidence is comprehensive. He'll likely accept a plea agreement to avoid trial." On her desk lay the fruits of my grim labor pawn shop receipts, neighbor testimonies, grainy security camera stills. Each sheet of paper represented nights of work, methodical hours piecing together a case, but also each one drove another nail into the coffin of what had once been my family. "Residential burglary with theft over $1,000, she explained, tapping one document with her pen. "Typically 2 to 4 years. With his clean record and family ties, he'll probably get probation. Mandatory counseling. It won't ruin him, Mr. Mills, but it may force him to face himself." Her words were meant to reassure. Instead, they left me hollow. The Douglas County Corrections Center was another world entirely. The clang of metal detectors. The indifferent gaze of guards who had seen too much human weakness to be surprised anymore. The air smelled of disinfectant and hopelessness. And then Melvin. He appeared behind reinforced glass wearing prison orange that leached every trace of warmth from his complexion. He had lost weight. His face looked sharper, harder, but it was his eyes that struck me most. Not sadness, not remorse, bitterness. His voice came through the intercom, distorted and metallic. "Are you satisfied now, seeing me locked up like an animal?" My throat tightened. "I wanted you to face consequences, not to become bitter." He leaned closer to the glass, his face twisted. "What did you expect, that I'd thank you, that I'd fall to my knees in gratitude for destroying my life?" The conversation lasted 20 minutes. 20 minutes that left me emptier than when I'd walked in. Prison was supposed to teach lessons, but all I saw was my son learning anger, resentment, everything but the truth. Back in Roy's kitchen, I barely touched the food he placed in front of me. He watched me, worry in his eyes that his military sternness couldn't disguise. "You're questioning yourself. I can see it eating you alive. What if I've destroyed any chance of redemption for him?" The question clawed its way out of me. Roy set his fork down. His voice was steady, like a man used to giving hard truths. "Silas, sometimes love means letting people face the consequences of their choices." I shook my head, the weight pressing harder. "But what if those consequences break him instead of fixing him?" "Then that's his choice too," Roy said quietly. "You can't save someone who doesn't want to be saved." The mail arrived the next morning, a heavy envelope that thudded onto the table like a verdict. More court documents, more dates, more reminders that the wheels of justice turned forward indifferent to a father's doubts. July bled into August. Nights grew longer, sleepless. Days blurred together with endless conversations with lawyers who spoke about my son in terms of case numbers, evidence chains, sentencing guidelines. Not once did anyone speak of him as the boy I had taught to ride a bicycle, the boy whose scraped knees I once kissed, better the boy who used to fall asleep in the back seat on long drives, his head resting on Ella's shoulder. And outside, the neighborhood whispered. Public opinion divided sharp as broken glass. Some neighbors said justice had been served. Others muttered about betrayal, about how no man should hand his son over to the law. Every sideways glance carried judgment. Every silence carried weight. Through it all, the question haunted me. Had I done the right thing? Or had I, in the name of principle, sacrificed the last fragile threads of my family? Some admired my resolve, calling it principle. Others whispered that I had betrayed blood, that I had chosen justice over love. Mrs. Peterson, who'd once baked me pies every Thanksgiving, no longer looked me in the eye. She crossed the street when she saw me coming, her silence sharper than any insult. People think they understand until it's their own child. Roy reminded me one evening as we walked under the fading Nebraska twilight. His voice carried the calm of someone who had already buried his own share of ghosts. Maybe they're right, I confessed, staring at the cracked sidewalk beneath my shoes. Maybe blood should be thicker than justice. Roy paused, then placed a hand on my shoulder. Or maybe justice is the truest form of love. Sometimes it's the only way to save someone who can't see they need saving. The preliminary hearing passed like a storm I could neither stop nor outrun. Melvin stood in the courtroom, shoulders bowed, his face a mask of shame. He accepted the plea deal. 2 years probation, mandatory gambling and addiction counseling, community service, restitution for what he stole. No prison time, not yet. If he completed it, no permanent record would stain his name. I should have felt relief. Instead, standing outside the courthouse beneath a sky that couldn't decide between rain and sun, I felt only hollow exhaustion. It was like winning a war in which no one had survived. That's when the clerk approached me. "Mr. Mills, this was left for you." An envelope, my son's handwriting. Inside a single sheet, "Dad, the counselor says I need to understand why you did this." "I'm trying. Maybe we can talk when I'm ready." "Still your son, Mel." The words were short, hesitant, but they cracked something open in me. That night, for the first time in months, I slept without waking to the sound of my own guilt. 6 months later, I stood in my living room, surrounded by boxes labeled in Roy's blocky handwriting, Arizona. The walls were bare, the mantel empty, but the air felt lighter, like the house itself had exhaled after holding its breath too long. "You sure about this?" Roy asked, securing another box with tape. Running away never solved anything. "I'm not running," I answered softly. "I'm choosing to heal somewhere new." On the kitchen counter lay another letter, 3 pages this time, worn at the creases from my constant rereading. "Dad, the gambling counselor says I have to accept responsibility before I can make amends. You were right, the addiction controlled me. The theft wasn't about money. It was about feeding something that hollowed me out. I see that now. I know you didn't do this to hurt me. You did it because you loved me enough to let me face the truth. I'm not ready to see you yet, but I wanted you to know counseling is helping. Maybe one day we can rebuild what I broke. Still learning how to be your son again, Melvin." I had read those lines 100 times yet that morning, holding the letter the dam finally broke. Tears I had caged for nearly a year spilled freely. My voice shook as I told Roy, "He gets it now." Took him long enough, he muttered, though his eyes softened with quiet pride. The moving truck arrived on a Tuesday that felt like a second birthday. Arizona promised distance from the shadows of Omaha and closeness to my sister, whose weekly calls had been lifelines when the silence in this house grew unbearable. "Any regrets?" Roy asked as we loaded the last box. I looked back at the empty doorway. The methods were painful, I admitted, but the principle was right. Sometimes the hardest thing and the right thing are the same thing. I could almost hear Ella's voice in the stillness. Love isn't always comfortable. At the airport, Roy pulled me into a rough, unspoken embrace. It felt like closure and a beginning all at once. 23 years of neighborly friendship, countless shared meals, summer barbecues and winter snow shoveling side by side, all of it distilled into a single handshake and a promise we both knew would be harder to keep than either of us wanted to admit. "Take care of yourself, Silas," my neighbor said, his eyes damp, though he tried to hide it. "And don't wait too long to answer when that boy calls." His words followed me all the way to the airport. On the flight to Phoenix, while the plane cut through endless stretches of cloud and sky, I found myself replaying the last year in fragments, the betrayal, the arrest, the courthouse, and the silence that had followed. Justice and family, principles and forgiveness. Somewhere over Kansas, I realized the hardest part had never been calling the police on my son. The hardest part had been accepting that love sometimes demands you to cause pain, to wound not out of cruelty, but in service of a deeper healing. Arizona welcomed me with skies so clear it felt like they'd been scrubbed clean, and a heat so unrelenting it seemed to bake doubt straight out of a man's bones. My new apartment overlooked jagged mountains, ancient and immovable, their vastness making my problems feel appropriately small, like pebbles dropped at their feet. On my nightstand sat the watch returned to me after the court proceedings, its face glinting faintly beside Ella's photograph. That watch had passed through 3 generations of Mills men, a silent witness to triumphs, mistakes, and second chances. Someday I knew it would be Melvin's again, but not yet. Not until he had proven he understood the lesson I had been too afraid to teach him until crisis forced my hand. For months the apartment was quiet except for the steady tick of that watch. Then one Thursday evening, half a year into my Arizona life, the silence broke. The phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I hadn't seen in more than a year. My heart stuttered before I answered. "Dad, it's me." Melvin's voice carried a new weight, rougher but steadier. The sound of a man who had been through fire and learned he could still walk. "Hello, son. I wanted to call on Mom's birthday." He said his words hesitant but true. "Thought she'd want us to talk today." "She would have," I said, my throat tight. There was a pause. "Then I've been sober from gambling for 8 months now. The counselor says I'm ready to start making real amends." How do you want to begin?" What followed was not just a phone call, but a reckoning. For 2 hours we talked, not as father and child caught in old roles, but as two men facing truth. We spoke about addiction and accountability, about justice and forgiveness, about the fragile line between enabling someone and loving them enough to let them fall. "I understand why you did it now," Melvin said at last, his voice breaking. "I hated you for it, but I understand. I never stopped loving you." "Not for 1 second, son," I told him. "Not for 1 single second." "I know, Dad." That's what made it so hard to accept. When the call ended, the desert sunset spilled across the mountains in waves of purple and gold, as if the earth itself had painted a benediction over the day. Tomorrow would bring another call, and the day after that, another small step toward rebuilding what had been broken. Justice had been served, but justice, I now understood, was never the end. It was only the doorway. The real work, the sacred work, was healing. The watch ticked steadily on my nightstand, keeping time not just for me, but for a future I could finally believe in. A future where love and accountability could coexist. Where hard choices didn't destroy a family but made it stronger. Where a father's greatest gift to his son wasn't protection from consequences, but the chance to face them and rise. Ella's photograph caught the last light of the sunset, her smile unchanged across the years. And in that quiet room, I could almost hear her voice, soft but certain. "Well done, Silas. Well done." If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to D Daily Stories, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left.